You see, I always figured the toughest thing about having a pool was the upkeep, the pumps, the debris, the never-ending costs for chemicals. But nope, the true horror show turned out to be my next-door neighbor Karen and her band of mooching buddies. They treated my backyard like it was the local splash zone. Anytime, day or evening, they'd slip in, paddling about like rowdy kids, guzzling bargain bin vino, cranking tunes, and scattering empty cans and soggy snacks. I gave them gentle reminders at the start, then sterner ones, but Karen would just grin and say, "Come on, don't be so stingy. It's only water." Stingy? It was my water, my pool, and my land. And when it came down to it, I devised a method to ensure they'd rue every uninvited plunge. Because the following time they leaped in, an event unfolded that Karen would always remember, and so would her locks. Before I plunge into the complete tale, leave a comment down there with your spot on the map and the current time. I'm curious how widespread these HOA sagas really are globally. Having a house with a backyard pool was meant to be my personal oasis. After 2 decades of toiling in the building trade, busting my hump on sites, I at last owned the place I'd envisioned. Brick exterior, covered patio, a pool gleaming like a sapphire in the Texas sunlight. I'd trim the grass, clear the drains, skim the surface, then kick back with an iced brew as my children frolicked. It wasn't luxurious. It wasn't a villa in the Hollywood Hills, but it belonged to us, and I took pride in it. That tranquility didn't endure. Not with Karen right next door. Karen wasn't your average neighbor. She was the neighbor. The type folks caution you about, but you dismiss until it's staring you in the face. Mid-50s. Peroxide blonde with dark roots peeking through. A voice that echoed across the street like an alarm. She'd previously held a spot on the HOA board, and though she'd been ousted for behavior they delicately called unsuitable, meaning she was a despot, she still behaved as if she controlled the whole area. Clipboard in grip, shades balanced on her nose, issuing commands about garbage cans and grass lengths like she was a top brass officer. Initially, I believed I could manage her. A quick nod, a pasted-on grin. I assumed if I avoided her path, she'd eventually move on. But Karen wasn't someone who moved on. She was the sort who ramped it up. It began subtly. I'd spot footprints by the pool upon returning from work. Damp towels that weren't ours. A subtle scent of discount fragrance hanging around. Then I glimpsed her once via the curtains. Karen in a flashy rose-colored bathing suit nursing a wine cup as if she ruled the suburbs. The initial confrontation, I aimed to be civil. "Hey Karen, the pool's not public. I'd like it if you checked first." She threw her head back and chuckled. "Oh, quit being silly. We're next door folks. Next door folks share. Not pools," I replied. "Not this one, at least." But she dismissed me like I was a bothersome server with the incorrect dish. From there, it worsened. She began inviting pals. 3 or 4 women in their middle years, along with the odd spouse or date, would saunter into my yard as though they held the deed. They'd fire up a wireless speaker pumping out Bon Jovi and 90s twang uncorking bottles like it was a beach bash in Florida. One day I arrived home to discover a giant pink bird-shaped float drifting in the water, partially flat with lipstick marks on its vinyl throat. It wasn't merely irritating, it was offensive. This was my land. I covered the treatments. I scraped the scum. I adjusted the blasted acidity. But when I resisted, Karen intensified with that arrogant grin. "You're acting greedy," she'd scoff. "Pools are for fun. What sort of neighbor bars everyone? Greedy." That term infuriated me more than anything. Greedy when I'd pulled overtime to buy this home. Greedy when I'd constructed that patio myself. All the while, she hadn't done a thing but pilfer my sanctuary and dump her garbage. What truly pushed me past the brink was the social media update. One evening, browsing on my device, I spotted an image Karen had shared. There she was, smack in my pool, arms raised triumphantly like she'd claimed victory. The text said, "Top no-cost perk in the area. HOA benefits. Sharing is caring." That sealed it. That ignited the spark. I began recording it all. Snaps of tracks, clips of Karen creeping through the side entrance, captures of her boastful posts. I pondered lodging a grievance with the HOA, but honestly, those gatherings are a farce, and Karen flourished in farces. She'd spin it into a talk on communal vibes and cast me as the bad guy somehow. So instead, I lounged in my outdoor seat one dusk, gazing at the pool, nursing my drink, and pondering. That's when I eyed the container of heavy-duty cleaner in the shed's nook. I typically used it for tough marks on the terrace. The warning label basically yelled, "Warning, could irritate," and abruptly, like a thunderclap, the scheme struck. I didn't have to yell at Karen. I didn't need the HOA. I didn't even require law enforcement. All I had to do was allow her to relish the pool my way. Since if Karen and her crew insisted on sneaking in, okay, they'd receive a swim they'd always recall. One swim and their skin would prickle like firebugs at a barbecue. One wash and their fancy-colored tresses would frizz, knot, perhaps lighten a tone. Nothing lasting, nothing really hazardous, just sufficient to make them reconsider using my space like a resort. And the finest aspect, I wouldn't need to do a thing post-setup. They'd inflict it on themselves. That evening, I lay awake in bed, beaming at the roof. My spouse turned over drowsy. "What's amusing?" "Nothing," I murmured. "Just organizing some local goodwill." I promise I hadn't felt that energized in ages. The following dawn, I rose early, headed to the shed, and gazed at that cleaner jug like it was a legendary sword. My strategy was straightforward yet potent. And if all proceeded as envisioned, by week's end, Karen and her pals would be itching, yelling, and vowing off my pool eternally. They craved complimentary spa sessions. Oh, I'd provide one. Just not the variety they anticipated. You'd assume after several alerts and perhaps the scowls from me cutting the grass while they chuckled in my pool, Karen and her gang would have caught on. But no, Karen wasn't one for subtle cues. She was the type who'd ignore a no-entry notice just to show she could. The deal with Karen was she didn't merely violate rules. She put on a show while doing it. Each intrusion into my yard turned into a performance with her in the spotlight. The noisier, the sloppier, the bolder, the better. One weekend afternoon, I drove into the garage after chores. I could hear the boom of music before I even exited my vehicle. The sort of boom that shakes your bones. Budget speakers at max volume. I strolled to the side area and halted abruptly. There were half a dozen this time. Karen, a pair of her gal pals, a few unfamiliar guys, and some fellow with a gut who seemed like he hadn't worn a top since the 90s. They were reclining on my outdoor seats, diving in my pool, cracking open seltzer cans like it was a waterside tavern. Karen noticed me and lifted her drink. "Oh, here's the homeowner. No worries, we're just warming the water for you." I gritted my teeth. "Leave now." She grinned innocently, like a feline about to pounce on a sparrow. "Chill out, neighbor. It's neighborhood camaraderie. You can't hoard this all." My hands balled up. Neighborhood camaraderie. When did that mean open entry to my yard like a town leisure spot? The nastiest part was the mess they abandoned. Vacant snack wrappers blowing over the turf, bottle tops shining in the blades. And once, incredibly, someone had tossed a limp pizza slice right into the pool. The filter almost gagged on the meat and gooey dairy. I'd rise the next day, step out with my mug, and find the water murky from lotion residue, drifting tubes, and the random limp float. It was like a college bash had invaded overnight. But Karen didn't halt at that. Oh no. She made my pool her private snapshot studio. One night, while flipping through social media, I almost sprayed my beverage. There she was, posing in the shallow section, donning huge shades and a wide-brimmed cap, labeling it, "Embracing the Luxe Life, Blessed Dr. Ho Perks." The replies were worse. "OMG, Karen, you're radiant. What resort is that? So envious. That pool rocks." And the clincher, community bonuses with a wink emoji. My temper flared so intensely I thought I'd scorch the screen. She wasn't simply swiping my pool. She was flaunting it, taunting me, making her intrusions a symbol of pride. I chose to probe her. The following weekend, I intentionally left the side entrance unlatched. As expected, by midday, I heard the familiar sounds of giggles and splashes. I peeked through the shades. There they were once more. Karen drifting on a bright float, sipping vino like she was an ancient queen on a river barge. Her companions dangled their legs in the water, tunes blasting, chuckles ringing out. In that instant, I understood something. Karen believed I lacked the nerve to halt her. She saw me as too courteous, too amicable, too rule-abiding to truly intervene. To her, I was merely the cranky fellow nearby who'd grumble and yell but never follow through. And truthfully, part of me considered dialing authorities or submitting a formal HOA report. But what would that achieve? Cops don't hurry for neighbor pool invasions, and HOA sessions were Karen's element. She'd distort the narrative, portray herself as the injured party, perhaps even penalize me for owning an overly enticing pool. No. To make her cease, I had to strike where it counted. Her ego, her looks, her facade. You see, Karen thrived on image. She aimed to appear impeccable, elegant, invincible. She tinted her hair routinely, cycling through blonde hues based on whatever discount product was available. Her manicure was perpetual, her cosmetics layered thick enough to weather a storm. The single thing she couldn't stand was appearing absurd. That's when the cleaner scheme evolved from a notion to a quest. But prior to launching it, I endured one final affront. It was a weekday evening when I returned late from the job, utterly drained. I trudged to the yard, yearning for a serene swim beneath the stars. Instead, I stepped into mayhem. Karen and her crew had opted for a nighttime dip fest. Twinkle lights hung over my barrier which I'd never installed. Tunes pulsed, glasses tinkled, and somebody was cooking patties on a mobile grill they'd hauled into my space without asking. I stood stunned. They'd converted my yard into a fairground. I charged toward the patio, my tone thundering over the music. "What on earth are you up to?" Silence fell for a split second. Then Karen, unflappable, hoisted her glass and said, "Ease up. We'll tidy. You ought to appreciate us. We're livening the spot." That was the breaking point. No more cautions, no more pleas, no more acting the sensible neighbor. Karen wanted to persist in pushing. All right, I was finished being the doormat. I retreated indoors, banged the door, and settled with a notebook. Phase 1, substances. Phase 2, schedule. Phase 3, endurance. By the time I'd finished jotting, I had a scheme worthy of a spy thriller antagonist. The next occasion Karen and her pals raided, they wouldn't depart my pool with cocky grins and social snaps. They'd leave with prickly skin, messed up hair, and a shame so acute it would burn fiercer than the cleaner. I took a final swig of my brew, reclined in the seat, and smirked. "Bring it, Karen," I whispered. "Bring it!" They claim vengeance is best dish chili. Me, I like it presented in a pool, cooled, treated, and spiked with sufficient cleaner to wreck your afternoon without getting me jailed. Following that evening dip disaster, I couldn't quit mulling it over. Each time I passed the shed and spotted that large container of potent cleaner, it almost nodded at me. It felt like destiny had handed me a present. And the more I pondered, the more I saw this wasn't mere retaliation. It was fitting retribution. Karen and her group wanted to use my pool as their exclusive retreat. Okay, I'd deliver the retreat experience, including skin annoyance and tangled tresses. Naturally, I had to be clever. The last thing I wanted was litigation. Karen might lack shame, but she wasn't dim. If something irreversible occurred, she'd haul me to court quicker than you can utter intrusion. No, I required unease, not peril. Shame, not harm? A blow to the dignity and conceit. So I did what any dutiful property owner scheming payback would. I investigated. Late nights with my wife dozing, I sat at the dining spot browsing pool care discussions. I learned about acidity balances, treatment boosts, and the effects of excess. The info was comical. Your locks will parch and snap. Skin rash assured. Swimwear might bleach out. Perfect. Exactly what I sought. The next day, I visited the supply shop. I snagged extra containers of cleaner, dropped them in the basket like a typical family man handling seasonal chores, and greeted the clerk as if it was routine. She had no clue she was processing the components for my masterwork. Back home, I hid them in the shed behind the mower where Karen never pried. Then I plotted the timing. Karen had a routine, a cycle to her invasions. Weekends were her major bash days. Midweek evenings were minor. Just her and a couple of companions lounging like suburb royalty. I reckoned a weekend afternoon would be ideal for my show. But I wasn't simply going to pour the cleaner and leave. No way. I wanted to observe the outcome. I wanted to see the precise instant arrogance flip to frenzy. So I positioned my surveillance cams, tilting them perfectly to cover the pool, patio, and the entrance they always used. I even checked the sound to catch any lucky yelps from Karen. Throughout the week, I acted nonchalant. I waved cordially when I saw her tending her plants. She flashed that patronizing smile, thinking she'd triumphed in the local feud. Let her believe it. She had no idea the conflict was commencing. Friday evening, after the youngsters slept, I crept out back with a container in each fist. The moon glowed on the pool, water still and tempting. I unscrewed the lid and streamed a flow into the far end, seeing it mix like mist under the top. A second container came next, then another. The odor was pungent, chemical, nipping my nostrils. I mixed the water with the skimmer, distributing the unique additive uniformly. When finished, the water appeared unchanged, pure and glistening under the lights. But I knew the truth. This wasn't a regular pool now. This was a snare. I lingered there briefly, smiling like a wild inventor over his creation. Then I murmured to the darkness, "Have fun with your retreat day, Karen." The next morning, I feigned normalcy. I cut the front grass, greeted a neighbor strolling by, even treated my kids to frozen treats. Meanwhile, the cams at home were primed and alert. Upon returning near lunch, I reviewed the recordings. As predicted on cue, the entrance squeaked. In strutted Karen, parading like she owned it, shades gleaming, bags over her arm. Following her, 3 pals tittering like teens. They tossed their items on my seats, peeled to swimsuits, and jumped straight in. I edged nearer to the display. This was the moment. Curtains up. For a handful of splendid minutes, all seemed ordinary. Splashes, chuckles, Karen bobbing on a vivid float with her wine holder. But then, as I'd foreseen, the itching commenced. First, one pal scratched her limbs, scowling. Then, another fidgeted her back like bugs were on her. Karen herself grabbed at her hair, puzzled. And then it erupted. She emitted a yell so piercing it blasted through my audio like a ghost's cry. "My hair! Good Lord, what's going on with my hair?" Her blonde tint was failing her, strands frizzing and cracking live. Her companions rushed from the pool, clawing, gripping their skin, yelling about stinging and prickling. One skidded on the patio, almost tumbling before hobbling to a seat. Karen wobbled to the side, her cosmetics streaked, her formerly flawless hair jutting out like she'd been zapped. I leaned back in my spot, arms crossed, beaming widely. The cleaner had performed flawlessly. Not risky, not enduring, but mortifying beyond belief. And the topper, I had it all taped. The HOA monarch had at last tasted her own brew, and she was gagging on it. If I had to sum up the spectacle in a single term, it'd be magnificent. All those haughty days, all those grins and cutting comments, all the litter and discarded containers they'd dumped, every bit of aggravation I'd suppressed was yielding returns via yells, waving limbs, and a hair catastrophe of epic proportions. On the feed, Karen was floundering to the steps like a frantic feline. Her pals weren't doing better. One lady scraped her limbs, grumbling about fiery skin. Another, the one I called Vino Queen, tottered onto the patio, hacking theatrically, her suit already appearing washed out and pitiful. And then the hair. Oh, the hair. Karen had always fussed over hers. Regular tints, pricey treatments, time invested in styling it perfectly. But cleaner ignores vanity. The second she hauled out of the water, her golden locks had morphed into a matted mess, frizzy and parched, with hints of citrus and pale showing like a cheap costume wig. The view alone made me chuckle so intensely my gut ached. I activated record on my device, grabbing every bit. This wasn't solely for my own thrill now. This was proof. If Karen attempted to warp the tale and depict herself as wronged, I'd have the clips of her invading, frolicking in my pool, and collapsing like a drama show star. By the time they fled, snatching cloths and howling at each other, the yard resembled a battlefield. Seats toppled, vino spilled, wet crisps mashed into the wood. Karen's float bobbed forlornly in the pool's edge like a doomed vessel. And me, I sat at the dining spot with a brew handy, viewing from the monitor, snickering like it was the greatest comedy series. "Should we head out?" my wife inquired warily, glancing over my shoulder. I shook my head. "Nah, let them sort it. They chose to frolic in my pool. They can face the fallout." She grinned, shook her head, and departed, whispering, "You're wicked." "Inventive," I amended. Big distinction. But the true wonder unfolded later that dusk. I was out front hydrating the grass when Karen charged by on the path, cloaked in a wrap, her hair protruding like dry brush. She met my gaze and stiffened. For the first time in ages, no grin, no cheek, no fake dominance, just pure, boiling shame. "There's an issue with your pool," she barked. I arched a brow. "Odd, it's fine for me." She parted her lips, then sealed them. Her pals lagging behind like soggy, beaten pups dodged my eyes completely. Not a peep. They vanished into her place, slamming the entrance, and I swear I caught one saying, "No more." Goal achieved. But the repercussions didn't end. The ensuing days were even more delightful. Karen ditched her daily HOA rounds. No striding the block with her board. No scolding youngsters to keep wheels off paths. It was like the despot had retreated. By week's middle, the murmurs started. At the cafe, I overheard two locals snickering. Saw Karen's hair? Like a straw stack zap. At the post box, another confided, heard her bash flopped. Good for her. Even the typically shy types, those who never challenged Karen, were giggling discreetly. And I didn't need to circulate the tale. The disgrace spread itself. Karen's conceit had been her vulnerability, and now the whole area was dissecting it. Of course, part of me fretted she'd retaliate fiercely. That was her way. But whenever I spotted her afar, she appeared diminished, shrunken. Gone was the swagger, the shrill tone, the superior vibe. Instead, she trudged, concealed under caps and wraps like a star evading photographers. But I wasn't letting her escape lightly. See, Karen had turned my pool into her platform for months. She'd paraded it online, boasted to her circle, shared images like she possessed it. It wasn't sufficient to just halt her. I wanted to reverse the roles. If she craved spotlight so much, I'd ensure she got the bad kind. So, one dusk, I forwarded the clips anonymously, naturally, to some reliable locals. Just a brief FYI message with the header, "Caught on cam pool invaders." No need to name names. The video told all. Karen and her group creeping in, chuckling, swimming, then the breakdown with yells, scratches, and that memorable hair fiasco. By dawn, the clip was circulating rapidly. One local messaged, "OMG, this is priceless." Another noted, "Justice finally," and my fave, "You're a hero." I remained silent, obviously. Believable denial, but inwardly I was smiling so broad my cheeks ached. The best Karen couldn't counter. If she griped, she'd confess to invading. If she twisted it, the clips would reveal her. She was stuck, trapped by her own hubris. And still, I knew this was merely the start, because Karen was unyielding to her core. She might be nursing injuries now, but eventually she'd strike. She always did. The query was, would she attempt to regain her top spot or plunge deeper? Either way, I was prepared. After all, I demonstrated one fact in HOA conflicts. I wasn't the doormat anymore. I was the fellow with the pool and the cleaner. When the regular HOA gathering arrived, Karen had been under the radar for a fortnight. That in itself was a wonder. No inspections, no online tirades, no rapping on doors to whine about messy cans or uneven bushes. The road had been strangely serene, like the hag had hibernated. But I knew Karen. She wouldn't vanish permanently. She thrived on dominance, notice, and turmoil. Predictably, she'd return fighting. And she did. The HOA convened in the local hall by the pond. Collapsible seats, tepid brew in foam holders, the standard. I arrived tardy, as usual, since nothing irked Karen more than me sauntering in relaxed while she was mid-rant. But this time she wasn't leading. She held no role now. Yet there she sat in the front, wrap around her damaged hair, cosmetics slathered to mask red spots on her skin. She perched upright, attempting to exude command like she was still the boss everyone obeyed. The chair, a steady man named Michael, coughed and began the list. Grass care, impending holiday cookout, funds for court repairs, the typical dull suburb stuff. Then Karen struck. She rose, cutting Michael off. "I must raise a grave concern in this group," she declared, tone elevated like a boiling pot. Michael exhaled. "Karen, hold for public input." She disregarded. "There's a safety risk here. A pool not properly cared for, substances mishandled. Locals, including kids, might be endangered." Murmurs spread. Some folks looked puzzled. I stayed expressionless, sipping lousy brew. Karen continued, theatrical as always. I personally endured it. I had skin rash, hair ruin, and she patted her wrap. Major upset. "This can't stand. We must identify the owner before harm occurs." I nearly coughed up my drink. She was actually attempting it. She was trying to reverse and blame me. Michael appeared confused. "Karen, do you mean yes?" She interrupted. "That pool is a disaster waiting. If we permit hazardous stuff to affect the area, we all could suffer. I propose the HOA probe and punish." That was my signal. I stood leisurely, purposefully, all eyes shifting to me. "Karen," I stated evenly, "are you really here accusing me of botching my own pool?" Her gaze sharpened. "You confess then?" I grinned. "Oh no, I'm not confessing a thing. I'm just noting how intriguing it is you'd know my pool's substance details firsthand. Some snickers arose. Karen's cheeks reddened. I was welcomed. Welcomed? I lifted a brow. That's curious because per my cams, I drew my phone. You weren't welcomed whatsoever. The space hushed. I pressed and the front screen lit up. I'd arrived ready with a drive containing the clips. And there it played. Karen and her pals sneaking via my entrance, paddling, sipping vino, cackling wildly. Then the climax. Karen grabbing her hair, yelling, her friends clawing and fleeing the pool in disorder. The room exploded. Some inhaled sharply. Others laughed uncontrollably. A senior man back there grumbled, "She deserved it." Karen advanced. "This violates privacy. You can't." Michael raised a palm. "Karen, stop! This shows clear intrusion on private land. You weren't welcomed. You lack basis to blame others." Her lips flapped like a stranded fish. Another local added, "Didn't you share pics of yourself in his pool, online, HO privilege or whatever?" Karen stammered. That was misconstrued. The chuckles amplified. The momentum had shifted. For once, Karen lacked control. She wasn't dreaded. She wasn't even esteemed. She was a jest. Michael struck the hammer. "This is resolved. Karen, you and your visitors will receive a penalty for intrusion. You're also prohibited from group facilities for half a year." Karen's face flushed deep. "You can't?" she wailed. But the group had proceeded. The board moved to the next point while murmurs and snickers echoed. Karen sank into her chair, shamed, wrap sliding enough to show the tangled, dry disaster below. I sat again, composed, and murmured just for her ears. "How's that for neighborhood camaraderie?" Her stare could have scorched metal, but it was irrelevant now. She'd been unmasked, robbed of influence, and labeled in the community's view as the phony she was. And for me, it surpassed any triumph. Heading home that night, locals patted my back, smiling. "Well done," one said. "High time someone resisted," another noted. I nodded, but inside I was thrilled. Not just from the victory, but realizing the power had changed. Karen wasn't invincible now. She wasn't the top dog. She was merely Karen, the lady with wrecked hair, a damaged pride, and no supporters remaining. But I also sensed something. Karen wasn't done. Not quite. Folks like her never surrender. They recover, wait, and scheme returns. And when she did, I'd be set because I wasn't just the adjacent resident anymore. I was the one who'd outplayed her. If shame was an illness, Karen was the origin. Post the HOA debacle, her standing plummeted faster than a heavy sinker in my pool. Locals gossiped. Some jeered outright. Youngsters on cycles raced by her home yelling, "Pool hag, pool hag!" I'd have pitied her if it wasn't so gratifying. But Karen was tenacious, if nothing else. She wouldn't accept defeat passively, not her. She'd dominated this area like a dictator for ages. And dictators don't yield their rule without battle. So she battled back. First was the rumor drive. She accosted some locals on dawn strolls, weaving a flimsy pity tale about how I'd doctored the pool to injure her on purpose. She cast herself as a target of toxin assault, flaunting her dry hair as proof. But when you've bossed folks for years, nobody rushes to your sympathy fest. Locals nodded courteously, then switched sides. Some chuckled directly. One man, Doug, bluntly stated, "Karen, you shouldn't have been in his pool anyway." That quieted her fast. Next, she pursued the law path. She genuinely contacted the cops. "Yep, emergency line. My neighbor toxified me." The cop arrived at my entrance, seeming half entertained, half weary. He outlined the complaint. I serenely displayed the clips. Karen invading, Karen celebrating, Karen howling as her cleaner-soaked hair crisped in the light. The cop laughed, shook his head, and said, "Lady, perhaps cease entering your neighbor's yard." Matter ended. By the third effort, Karen was frantic. She strode to my door one dusk, hands fisted, face taut. When I answered, she unleashed a rant. "You believe you've triumphed, huh? You shamed me. You destroyed my existence." I rested on the frame, serene as a sage. "Karen, you destroyed your own." I merely accelerated it. Her eyes flamed with fury. "This isn't finished. Types like me don't get sidelined." "Types like you," I said deliberately, "already have been." I shut the door before she could fire back. And for the first time, she didn't pound on it. She simply shuffled off, beaten down. But her downward slide didn't wrap up there. No way. She attempted one final gathering in her own yard, rounding up whatever followers she had left, maybe a handful at best. Perhaps a dozen folks turned up. But once they arrived, they took in the sorry state of her setup. Green slime creeping along the edges of her pool, murky depths, rickety chairs half falling apart. No one dared to even test the water with a pinky. They milled about uncomfortably, nursing discount vino from cartons while Karen attempted to fire them up with rants about reclaiming the block. It flopped hard. In under an hour, her crowd had dwindled away, tossing out lame apologies. Karen ended up solo, her glass quivering in her grip, peering into her filthy water like it held some secret fix. On the flip side, my place was thriving. Folks who'd kept their space before now swung by with greetings, dropped in for a cold one, even politely requested if their little ones could join for a supervised splash. For the first time, the area wasn't split between Karen's underlings and the rest of us. It was cohesive, and somehow I'd turned into the quiet center of it all. The twist didn't escape me. Karen had wielded the HOA like a club for years, strong-arming everyone into line. And now, with her clout yanked away, she was the outcast. The last spike in her downfall hit a week later. The HOA slapped up an official alert on the shared board and in the regular update. Reminder to all, entering private grounds without permission is not allowed. Recent events have led to penalties and actions. Consider this a heads up. Honor others' spaces. No names dropped, but everyone got the drift. Karen's embarrassment was etched in print, landing in every letter slot around. I spotted her ripping one down near the hall, her fingers trembling with anger. A bunch of teens snickered as they strolled by. She shot them a death stare to hush them, but they just kept on giggling. That was the instant it sank in for me. Karen wasn't intimidating anymore. She wasn't admired. She wasn't even put up with. She was a laughingstock. And laughingstocks don't call the shots in neighborhoods. That weekend, I lounged by my pool once more, drink in hand, the surface still and pristine. My youngsters played in the water, my spouse flipped through pages, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I experienced genuine calm. True serenity. As the sun slipped away, I reflected on the whole mess. The cleaner, the recordings, the gathering, the collapse, and it hit me. Karen had always figured she was above it all. She believed she could grab whatever she wanted without fallout. But ultimately, her own overconfidence had unraveled her, with a dash of my ingenuity thrown in. I didn't just safeguard my pool, I shielded the whole block. I showed folks that tyrants only hold sway if you hand it over. Karen had footed the bill. And judging by her drooping flowers, her wild yard, and her deserted drive, she'd be settling that tab for ages. But underneath it all, I sensed one final clash brewing. Karen wasn't wired to vanish softly. Types like her never are, and when she made her move, I'd be geared up because this went beyond a simple pool skirmish. This was a full-on HOA battle, and I was coming out on top. If there's one lesson I've picked up about folks like Karen, it's this. They don't simply drift off. They flail, they scratch, they howl, and they pull down anyone nearby in the chaos. So when she went radio silent after the HOA bulletin singled her out, I knew the end wasn't here. Quiet wasn't giving in. It was scheming. And sure as the sun rises, the tempest hit. It kicked off with small jabs. A weird dead spot on my front grass where salt had obviously been dumped. A couple of garbage sacks hurled by my curb under cover of darkness. Small-time, immature antics. The sort Karen figured would unravel me. But honestly, I just grinned. She was lashing out, slipping from her grip. The big showdown arrived at the upcoming HOA Bash, the seasonal street fest. It was the initial major get-together since her notorious pool cleaner catastrophe, and we all knew she'd either attempt to seize back her spot or blow up in the effort. I rolled in with my crew, steady as always, hauling a box of drinks. Locals waved, thumped my shoulder, and passed me patties hot from the flames. It was the warmest the group had ever felt. Meanwhile, Karen crept in decked out in a broad hat and massive shades, aiming to conceal the leftovers of her scorched mane. She clutched her trusty board like she still held the reins. The second she started yapping, eyes rolled everywhere. She griped about parking slip-ups. She fussed over the grill haze. She scolded a youngster for zooming his wheels too quick. But rather than meek quiet, she got chuckles. Instead of obedience, she got ridicule. "Watch it, Karen," one father called out boldly. He might have to scrub the path with cleaner after those tire streaks. The entire bunch exploded in mirth. Karen's cheeks turned fire engine red. She screeched, "This is bullying! You can't handle me like this." And that's when Michael, the HOA head, jumped in, composed, solid, but no nonsense. "Karen, you're off the board now. You hold no sway here. And with your ongoing slip-ups, count yourself fortunate you're not staring down court dates." A quiet dropped over the group. Karen went rigid, her lips flapping uselessly. Her board trembled in her grasp. For years, she'd swung that HOA authority like a blade, and now, before the whole crowd, it was ripped from her. I swear you could pinpoint the exact second her reign crumbled. She let the board fall, spun around, and charged off. The folks cheered, not from meanness, but pure release. For the first time in forever, we were liberated. That evening, back by my pool, it dawned on me that Karen had truly settled the score. Not from the hair wreck, not from the exposure at the session, but because she'd lost what she prized above all: dominance, spotlight, and the facade of control. The pool surface glowed peaceful and pure. My kids paddled joyfully. My wife relaxed with a grin. And for the first time since settling here, it truly felt like my haven. Karen was done for, and I was at last content. If you've hung in there with me to this point, here's the chunk that counts the most. This yarn wasn't solely about a pool or cleaner or one rotten neighbor who figured she could trample everyone. It was about limits, about holding your ground when somebody oversteps. For months, I allowed Karen to steamroll me because I dodged fights. I thought maintaining harmony meant letting her rule. But harmony without dignity isn't harmony. It's capitulation. And capitulation just fuels the aggressor. When I finally stepped up, not with noise or brutality or spite, but with proof, determination, and a spark of ingenuity, the setup flipped. Folks who'd stayed mum began voicing out. People quit dreading Karen, and the entire block improved. That's the takeaway. You don't need to battle with volume or violence or cruelty. Just battle wisely. Stand strong. Leverage what you've got, be it a recorder, a guideline, or, even a container of cleaner. So if you're facing your own Karen, keep this in mind. You're not helpless. Establish your lines. Guard what's yours. And don't shy from making them face the music when they cross over. Now, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. What's the worst HOA or neighbor story you've ever dealt with? And if you want more outrageous HOA drama, hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss what's coming.